So, sensory practice, what really is the purpose? Is to learn about a wine style through sensory training and through tasting. I want to give you the perspective and direction so that you can really awaken your senses and train your senses, train your brain to identify specific attributes of Chardonnay. Rather than giving you a list of descriptors, which I will, but I won't ask you to memorize everything. And anytime I will say this wine is from a cool climate, you will just tell me right away what it's supposed to taste. The way I'm training you is to let your senses and your brain, connect the dots, familiarize themselves with the different sensation, the different perceptions of what an apple smell like, a lemon smell like, what acidity is, so that you can identify those perceptions in wine. And then later on, interpret your perceptions in what it means for the wine, if you're interested to do so. But for me, it's really to help you train your senses to identify those different sensations and make your mind, whether you like or you don't like the wine, and being able to say why you don't like it or why you like it, so that you can maybe smarter shopper at the end of the day. Now I want to go into the sensory practice, what we are going to do, and give you a bit more pointers into the next step. The first part of our training is to decide on which particular Chardonnay descriptor we want to start working on and familiarize ourselves, so that when we arrive in week 4, tasting a Chardonnay wine, we'll be more exercised, trained on those descriptors, so that you can be a bit more confident. If you perceive a buttery note, you know it's butter because you have practiced for 2 weeks on identifying this particular descriptor. So that's the first step. So how do we do that? So we talk about those 4 stylistic poles. If you are really a beginner in your sensory practice, I always start from the easy point. Don't try to compare pear and apple because it can be very confusing, but compare very contrasting aromas or flavors. So choose 3 to 6 descriptors in the different pole. For example, you could take a green apple, maybe a yogurt aroma, maybe some peach, vanilla, and maybe a dry fruit. Don't overcommit 3 if you really want to take your time or you don't have a lot of time to dedicate to your practice. 6 is the maximum I always recommend, because the more you try to learn and smell or taste, the more you are going to confuse your senses. So start small, but consistent. That's how we evolve in our practice. If you are more advanced in your sensory practice and you want to challenge a little bit yourself, maybe you can go into 1 sensory pole or compare 2 sensory poles and choose aromas that are maybe a bit close, toasting and smoky, when it's not very intense, can be a bit confusing in a wine. So I would maybe choose descriptors in those 2 poles if you are more advanced in your training. But again, your task is to choose and find product references that you are going to use in the week 3, which will be to start practicing with those product reference. So why are we using product reference? Because you can think about an apple, but if you don't pay attention really about the taste of an apple, it's difficult for your brain to remember. So we choose for 1 descriptor, 1 product reference. And you can see pictures from the previous practice where a participant shared their photos. So if you want to work on 3 descriptors, you will have a reference from a green apple, a reference for maybe peach, and a reference for yogurt, let's say. So you are going to practice using the N.O.S.E framework to really pay attention to what this product reference smells like, tastes like, and do that several times during the week. That's how we are training our senses to really notice and put a label on the perception. Because when you work on wine, you don't see the apple, so you cannot really be sure that you smell apple. So you really have to practice and train your brain, your sense of smell, your sense of taste, and your brain to recognize those different sensations. So when you perceive something similar in wine, you are more confident in your description. We always start by having product reference that are raw, but as we evolve in the sensory practice, I always recommend that we use the product reference infused in wine because it will give the character to the wine, and then you train your senses and your brain to identify those descriptors in the wine context. So you don't see if it's an apple or lemon, you just see wine. So you really have to use your sense of smell and taste to detect and recognize the perception. So it comes with practice, but that's the next advanced step in your training. So that's happening in week 3. We will do the tasting the following week. And during the tasting, you will practice sensory description on one particular Chardonnay wine that you will have selected, or 2, depending on where you are in your sensory practice, at which level. And I share with you the tasting guide and the tasting sheet, so you can go through your evaluation, what you smell, what you taste. And again, you're not looking for specific descriptors. You have trained your senses and your brain the week before to identify 3 to 6 Chardonnay descriptors. And here, just like you smell the wine and you let the wine tell you what it has to offer. That's really the difference. You're not looking for specific things. You are letting the wine express itself. All right, so that will be week 4. And this is it. Now it's time for you to continue your palate development. You have the map. So if you're not a member of the Curious Palates community, I invite you to join us, do your palate development with us. If you really want to increase your tasting confidence, if you have a deadline to pass a blind tasting exam, or if you just want to progress with my help and the support of others, that's really what I recommend.